Ooh, very exciting.
I can finally see you and see the text at the same time. So it's gonna change my whole game. I'll be so smooth today.
That's amazing.
I'm probably gonna lose track of where I am. Actually, I'm probably gonna be like, wait, where's the window?
Still look at the wrong screen.
I'm still gonna be looking at the wrong screen. I guarantee. Anyway, we live in hope.
Oh man. I remember, like working for the government, you usually had 2 monitors because there's always a bunch of stuff to look at. But like when I started working from home, I was like, I feel naked.
Yeah.
I only have my laptop.
Yeah, so tiny.
So I had to get another monitor.
Yeah. I can tell I'm gonna like this better. I'm still gonna have to get used to it. And it's funny that I've been doing this for 2 years, and I'm just now getting to where I'm using 2 monitors. So hello, Paula and Tony.
Good morning. Good morning.
I was just telling Miller that I'm really excited because I actually have 2 monitors today, so I can I can have the text and I can look at you, and I'm just so excited. I can't tell you.
Nerd. Oh,
I am a nerd. Oh yes. Not only am I a nerd, I got bifocals now, so I can really
join the club. Join the club. They cute, but they bifocals.
I've had bifocals for 10 years.
So I'm still getting used to like figuring out like how to drive with them and stuff, but I'm getting better.
You end up doing a lot of this.
Yes. Yeah. I'm doing a lot of that. Indeed.
I guess you heard about the shooting yesterday
or
last night.
Yes.
This world is so messed up.
And today is the Transgender Day of Remembrance, and apparently this was, from what I've read, I could be, again,
I think you're absolutely right.
This is a drag show, and people who've been harping on this and the moral panic, all that stuff, it's all on them. They need to wear this.
The same way the insurrection's all on one person.
It's yeah.
Who's now running for president. So.
Yeah. So it's tough. I mean,
this is why we can't have nice things.
Yeah. Right.
This is why I want to move to Europe so bad.
Yeah.
Which country though, Paula? I mean, like literally the original
carefully.
Well, I'm thinking Finland or Sweden. Are those okay?
Yeah.
Okay, that won't work.
Well, I'm glad to see you guys, and want to welcome those who are tuning in on Facebook and YouTube. Want to thank you for joining us for worship today. We'll give people just a minute more to get on. If you are streaming, I would like to invite you to click like or just leave a comment from where you're watching from. That way we can count you, include you in our attendance today. Also, when we get to the point where we pray, if you would like to lift up prayer requests, you can do that. So we do this online thing kind of like we do house church. It's pretty informal. People, real life happens while we're doing this. So people come in and go. So, but we focus on discussion and discipleship. So glad that, I got chat disabled. So let me fix that. That would be, there we go. Yeah, everybody. So if you are streaming, just leave something in the comments for us. That's how we will monitor, and we'll include your voice as we worship together. So can we keep the same roles, folks? Tony, can you be liturgist, and Rob, you'll be voice of the people? Miller, if you'll take New Testament, and Paula, if you'll take the Hebrew Bible lesson. And then when we get to prayer requests, I'll monitor YouTube if someone can monitor Facebook for us.
I got Facebook.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to pull up the liturgy so we can get going.
Good morning. On this day in 284, the Roman army proclaimed Diocletian as emperor. He would go on to lead the most extensive persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire from 303 to 311. Today is also the feast of several saints who were martyred by Diocletian for refusing to renounce their faith, including Saint Apelles, Gallus, and Agapius. Agapius was arrested and tortured on 4 different occasions. Today is also the birthday of Pauli Murray in 1910, who was a poet, activist, and lawyer who fought segregation. She was also the first African-American woman to be ordained as an Episcopal priest. She coined the term Jane Crow to refer to the academic discrimination against Black women that she experienced. She has posthumously been described as transgender and reminds us of the liminal spaces many of our faith heroes lived in, even as they work for a more humane world. Today is also Transgender Day of Remembrance, which honors the memories of those who have died from acts of anti-transgender violence. Greetings. Today we draw a circle not of exclusion, but of inclusion.
Jesus has revealed that God's nature is love.
And the glory of God is a human being fully alive.
We come to be disciples of love and of life.
To learn and to teach, to share the wisdom of our ancestors.
Draw near and let us break together the bread of life.
Psalms 46. God is our refuge and strength, a help always near in times of great trouble.
That's why we won't be afraid when the world falls apart, when the mountains crumble into the center of the sea, when its waters roar and rage, when the mountains shake because of its surging waves. Selah.
There's a river whose streams gladden God's city, the holiest dwelling of the Most High.
God is in that city. It will never crumble. God will help it when morning dawns.
Nations roar, kingdoms crumble. God utters God's voice, the earth melts.
The commander of heavenly forces is with us. The God of Jacob is our place of safety. Selah.
Come see the deeds of our I Am, what devastation God has imposed on the earth.
Bringing wars to an end in every corner of the world, breaking the bow and shattering the spear, burning chariots with fire.
That's enough. Now know that I am God. I'm exalted among all nations. I'm exalted throughout the world.
The commander of heavenly forces is with us. The God of Rachel is our place of safety. Selah.
Jeremiah 23, 1-6. Watch out, you shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, declares the I Am. This is what I am, the God of Israel proclaims about the shepherds who tend to my people. You are the ones who have scattered my flock and driven them away. You haven't attended to their needs, so I will take revenge on you for the terrible things you have done to them, declares the sovereign God. I myself will gather the few remaining sheep from all the countries where I have driven them. I will bring them back to their pasture, and they will be fruitful and multiply. I will place over them shepherds who care for them. Then they will no longer be afraid or dread harm, nor will any be missing, declares the womb of life. The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up a righteous descendant from David's line, and he will rule as a wise king. He will do what is just and right in the land. During his lifetime, Judah will be saved and Israel will live in safety. And his name will be Zedekiah, the I Am, our righteousness.
Luke 19, 1-10. When they arrived at the place called the Skull, they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." They drew lots as a way of dividing up his clothing. The people were standing around watching, but the leaders sneered at him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he really is the Christ sent from God, the chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him. They came up to him, offering him sour wine and saying, "If you really are the king of the Jews, save yourself." Above his head was a notice of the formal charge against him. It read, "This is the king of the Jews." One of the criminals hanging next to Jesus insulted him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." Responding, the other criminal spoke harshly to him. "Don't you fear God, seeing that you've also been sentenced to die? We are rightly condemned, but we are receiving the appropriate sentence for what we did. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus replied, "I assure you that today you will be with me in paradise." May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
The Reverend Dr. Polly Murray wrote, "I intend to do my part through the power of persuasion, by spiritual resistance, by the power of my pen, and by inviting the violence upon my own body. But what is life itself without freedom to walk proudly before God and humans, and to glorify creation through the genius of self-expression? I intend to destroy segregation by positive and embracing methods. When my brothers try to draw a circle to exclude me, I shall draw a larger circle to include them. Where they speak out for privilege of a puny group, I shall shout for the rights of all humankind. And in not a single one of these little campaigns was I victorious. In other words, in each case, I personally failed, but I have lived to see the thesis upon which I was operating vindicated. And what I very often say is that I've lived to see my lost causes found." Hey, Dave, before we go into prayer, I do want to just shout out Linda, who's listening from Huntsville, Bill Wayne from New Jersey, and Kyla from Kingston, Ontario. We really enjoy having people from around the country join us every Sunday, and I just want to make sure you guys know that.
Thank you, Tony, for saying that. Yeah, so welcome to everyone who's watching and sharing, and invite you to participate, especially as we pray and discuss. We're going to move into a time of prayer. I'm going to get us started, and then if you would like to lift up a prayer concern, feel free to put it in the chat, or you can leave it in the comments if you're on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll lift that up as well. Let's pray together. Jesus, our Messiah, we acknowledge you as a sovereign, not a king in the way that the world recognizes kings, with force and anger and punishment, but one who rules through the power of love, one who rules by self-emptying, pouring yourself out, loving people and all creation. So in the light of your leadership, we renew our baptismal vows. We resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. We dedicate ourselves to live in the light of your leadership and to pledge ourselves to work and pray and do the things to draw this world more fully under your will. We acknowledge your sacrifice and your gift for us, and we recognize in it the suffering of all who've worked to make the world a better place. In particular, God, on this Transgender Day of Remembrance, we remember those who have died simply expressing themselves for being who they are. Our hearts grieve for those who have died in this most recent act of violence at a nightclub. It is far too familiar. We are frustrated with the inaction of our political leaders to do what's necessary to reduce violence in our country and across the world. God, we lift up ourselves. We have so many concerns, things on our minds, ways we would ask, God, that you shape our world. We have fears and worries. We have regrets. We have battles that we're fighting. Help us in those battles to recognize that every human is struggling. Every human is striving for something. And we are grateful for you for life and for the ability to help and lean on each other, that we can all be pilgrims on this journey. And so now I invite those of you listening to share prayer concerns and people and situations that are close to you.
For the family of Mike Williams.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Miles Mann,
Lord, hear our prayer.
In gratitude for an excellent prognosis for baby Hank in Orlando, who we prayed for last week.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For our students.
Lord, hear our prayer.
And for Teresa's mama and her grandparents.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Colorado Springs.
Lord, hear our prayer.
for those struggling with the temptation to self-harm.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For transgender people everywhere.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Praise for Debbie Kelly's new grandchild.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those who have refound Jesus and his light.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For forgiveness for all the many things we take for granted that make our life sweet.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For children struggling with respiratory illnesses.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For people struggling to make the right decisions.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For everyone traveling for the holidays.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those who experience loneliness and isolation during the holidays.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those grieving the loss of loved ones around this time.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gratitude for one of the few holidays that emphasizes relationships more than materialism.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gracious God, for all these that we've lifted up, we give you thanks that you hear our prayer. We're reminded that so many of our prayers are simply help, thank you, and wow. So we join our prayers with the prayer Jesus taught us. Oops. Let me try that again. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So today is an interesting holiday. We're drawing to the close of the Christian year, the liturgical year. And today on the church calendar, it's called Christ the King Sunday. And because it's finishing the year, we have passages that highlight the idea of kingship as Jesus as a king. And I got to tell you, it's a little bit, I struggle with it a little bit, because the very idea of king, in some ways, I think is a problem in Christian theology and in the metaphors that we use. The idea of God's sovereignty and how is Christ a king, I think, are the important questions. So this day, they came up with this day back in the 30s, actually, and it was during a time in Europe where there were a lot of strong ideologies like Nazism and communism and capitalism, and there was a particular church leader that said, we need to remember that our primary loyalty is to Jesus. And so while I kind of celebrate the idea behind that, I have a problem with the way it was done. And it's often done this way, right? Sort of the trump card. Jesus is the trump card. And I'm using that word intentionally because for some reason, whenever we start talking about kings, we start talking about authoritarianism and all these things that were anathema, I think, to the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I want to go back and talk about these two verses that we heard. The first one was the New Testament verse where Jesus is led to the hill of the skull and he's crucified. And the sign above his head says, King of the Jews. Now, this was put there by the Romans. And there was probably a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing about it. Not only were they trying to offend the Jews, but Romans were of the opinion that there couldn't be a king of the Jews. The Jews were too rowdy. You couldn't put a king over them and control them. They really didn't like having to supervise this occupied territory, and they had a lot of contempt for the people that they were occupying. So when they put this sign above Jesus, it's done in a tongue-in-cheek way. But for the authors of the gospel, it's there's a little bit of truth to it. The whole idea is, well, yeah, Jesus is a Messiah. Jesus is embodying all the things that the prophets advertised. And when he's put on the cross, it's a kind of coronation. He even has a crown of thorns. And the whole idea is that this is upending the idea of kingship. Jesus is not a king like other kings. Jesus is not a king who employs force. Jesus is not a king who sits on a throne. The whole idea of being lifted up, of the whole kingship pageantry, it's flipped on its head. And it's done to mock Jesus, but I think for the gospel writers, they're mocking the idea of kingship. I think they're taking it down. They're saying, yeah, this is what real spiritual leadership looks like. This is what God does. God's not sitting high up on a throne dictating how things are going. God's down here in the muck with the rest of us, fighting on our behalf. That's the kingship we're talking about. And I think to understand the idea of Jesus's kingship, we have to really understand the prophets. So I want to put this text back up on the screen for just a minute. So this is Jeremiah, and he says, "Watch out, you shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord, the I Am. This is what I Am, the God of Israel, proclaims about shepherds who," I like the way they did this, "tend to my people. You are the ones who have scattered my flock and driven them away. You haven't attended to their needs. So I will take revenge on you for the terrible things you've done to them. I myself will gather the few remaining sheep from all the countries where I have driven them. I will bring them back to their pasture, and they will be fruitful and multiply. I will place over them shepherds who care for them. They will no longer be afraid or dread harm, nor will any be missing." So Jeremiah is also using language that another prophet, Ezekiel, used. Ezekiel even gets a little bit more harsh. He says to the shepherds, "You haven't taken care of the mother sheep and their young. You haven't gone after those who are lost. You've exploited the sheep." So I want to take this word shepherd and just point out that this was the way the prophets understood the role of the leaders of Israel. Leaders were supposed to be shepherds. and they were judged by how well they kept the flock together. They were judged by how well the least sheep did. Like if you weren't taking care of the sick sheep, if you weren't making sure all the flock was together, that they had plenty to eat, that they were nourished, you were a bad shepherd. It's like this is sort of the baseline of shepherding, is you take care of the sheep, right? You help them be fruitful. You help them multiply. But shepherds who didn't do that were bad shepherds. So the word that we use for that in modern day life is pastor. We talk about the word pastor just means someone who takes animals out to pasture. A pastor was a shepherd. And I think it's interesting that we have changed the roles. We've flipped the roles upside down in our society, right? Because when we say pastor, we think, oh, that's a religious leader. That's like Dave or somebody like that. That's somebody whose job is to wear a clergy collar and say holy things and read from the Bible and teach people about God. That's a pastor. The pastors are the ones who are caring for their flock. And I want to say, although I feel I'm called to be a clergy person, although I'm called to be a pastor in the modern sense of the word, I am not called to be a pastor in the ancient biblical sense of the word, okay? Because the pastor, part of the job of the pastor was to fight the lions and the wolves, right? To keep the predators away from the flock. And unfortunately, I am not allowed to use violence to protect the people I want to protect, right? I say unfortunately, I'm not a violent person, but the job of the shepherd is sometimes you have to protect the flock. You have to protect the flock. But in our world, who has a monopoly on violence? Who has the way to protect the flock from predators? It's political leaders. Our political leaders should be pastors. According to the prophets, according to the Bible, right? Shepherds are supposed to take care of their flock. They're also supposed to make sure those who are hungry get fed. So I want to point out that the reason that these roles have flipped, the reason that we use these words differently than they used them in the past, is so that rich and powerful people can get away with not taking care of the poor. That's the primary reason. And that's the reason today people will say, oh, well, let the church take care of the poor, right? You're a pastor, you're supposed to take care of the poor. And look, I do believe that poverty is everybody's business, right? But Ezekiel says to the fat sheep, why have you muddied the stream? And why have you trampled the pasture with your feet? Now must my flock eat what you've trampled with your feet and drink what you've muddied with your feet? The prophets are furious that the pastors haven't maintained equality, that they haven't taken care of the poor. The whole idea of taking care of the sheep, not it's live and let live or live and let die. It's not social Darwinism. It's not, oh, well, there's some people who have the skills are going to excel and the people who don't have the skills are going to fall behind. And that's just the way we need to do it. And we need to not interfere. We need to not do social engineering, all that stuff. The arguments you hear for privatizing charity, for making it all about let the churches handle it. The whole point is that the churches can't handle it, right? I do not have the ability to stop somebody from polluting. I do not have the ability to stop somebody from exploiting somebody else through financial means. I can't change the mortgage industry, right? All these things that we say, okay, you take care of the poor. The whole point is we don't have the power to take care of the poor. The people who have the power to do something about it steadfastly refuse. And that's why God says, y'all are bad shepherds. I just want to kind of do a little bit of historical and art appreciation here. Let me pull up some images. This is actually, this is a picture I took back in 2006. It's in Jordan. It's as we were kind of coming into Israel, and you see the sheep down here. Okay, So this is what a pastoral scene looks like in Israel and Jordan. This field is called a green pasture. I know it looks kind of brown. It is kind of brown, but this is actually pretty lush for some places, and this is considered good pasture land. I want to show you again. Here's a goat. Here's the greenery. You know, it's mostly brown, but there's stuff to eat there. The whole idea is if the food is, although Israel is part of the so-called Fertile Crescent, and there are very lush places, the whole idea is sometimes food is a little bit scarce. So how you allocate food, how you allocate the pasture land is important, right? So here's a goat in that area. Here's a much greener area. And this is actually called the Valley of the Doves. Jesus would have walked through this pathway on his way from Nazareth to Capernaum. And you can see all the caves up here. Sometimes during various revolutions, people would hide in the caves. This is where the outlaws and folks would hang out. But you can see way down here, there's the sheep, little white dots. This is very fertile pasture. So this, I think, helps put it into context when you start thinking about, okay, who were pastors in the Hebrew Bible? Moses was a pastor. David was a pastor, right? Political leaders were pastors. The kings, the leaders of the country were pastors. Also want to share with you, so oftentimes we have, this is the image. This is supposed to be David defending his sheep against lions. That kid's about to get eaten. He does not look like he's ready to go up against that lion, honestly. I also wanted to share, this is a great drawing in the catacombs of Rome. This is about 200 AD, so about 200 years after Christ. And I just want you to notice, although it has probably darkened through the ages, this character right here, this is not a white person. Look at the hair, right? So this is the Good Shepherd from Rome, circa 200. Just to give you a sense of what people were putting on the walls. It wasn't, this was not it, okay? This is the Good Shepherd. All right, so when they were thinking Good Shepherd, this is the image they had. And so when people would talk about Jesus as being the Good Shepherd, they were not thinking of him just in religious terms, right? The idea was he was a transformative presence who was going to bring equity. The thin sheep were going to get enough food. The mother sheep were going to get taken care of. This is the kingdom, the reign that Jesus proclaimed. The role of clergy in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, they didn't call clergy shepherds. Clergy had two different titles. Well, and I won't even say clergy, but one was priest. Priest was the main form of clergy. Priests supervised the sacrificial system, right? They sometimes they were musicians, like the Levitical priests. They studied the Bible, but they had sort of their religious domain. Those were priests. The other kind of religious character were the prophets. And some prophets were advisors to the king. So some kings often would have their advisors, and some would be designated as prophets. They also had prophetic guilds like Elijah and Elisha. So these were kind of like monks and nuns who often would live in community and study the Bible or study what God wanted, but they were prophets, right? They were vocal. And oftentimes they would critique the kings. They were there to be the king's conscience, to call them back to what they were supposed to be doing. And that's why Jeremiah and Ezekiel, who are prophets, are saying to the king, y'all have been bad shepherds. They weren't talking about religious leaders. They were talking to political leaders. So I'm sharing this all with you because I think when we talk about Christ the King, it's supposed to flip things around for us. It's supposed to be a countercultural view. We're not supposed to think of clergy as shepherds. We're supposed to think of our leaders as shepherds, and we're supposed to call them to account when they're bad shepherds, when they need to change the way they're shepherding. So, some of you have probably heard me say this kind of stuff before, but I think it's important, especially because when we talk about a biblical worldview, to really get into what people meant in the Hebrew Bible when they talked about pastors or shepherds, priests and prophets, because the way that we do those roles in our society today, it ain't working. And what would happen? I guess this is my finishing question, and the thing I would like to get some feedback from you all on. What would happen if we actually expected leaders to be shepherds? What would happen if we actually expected kings to do shepherds' business? And I know we can complain about the way things are right now, but I want us to start by imagining what would it be like if we expected our leaders to be shepherds. So, love to hear what you have to say.
The bar is so low for leadership.
Yeah.
Like almost like non-existently low for leadership. And unfortunately, it's not just in our national or world politics. It's very true here locally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the things that we experience, a lot of the poverty, a lot of the violence, a lot of this stuff will go away if we were to hold our leaders more accountable and just expect something from them. Like, we literally don't expect anything from people. We go, even when we talk about elections, we go to the polls, we vote for these people, and we don't think about them, and they don't think about us until 4 years later when they're on the trails again.
Right.
Like, I mean, like, I'm always like, Birmingham, I love the city, but it makes me sick. Like, literally, the people of Birmingham don't do anything to hold our elected officials accountable for anything. I'm talking about simple stuff like code enforcement and like picking up the trash.
Yeah.
I made a joke the other day, like, our garbage people leave more trash than they pick up. Literally, a friend of mine who lives in another part of town said the exact same thing.
Yeah.
But what do? We complain about it to ourselves, and we just kind of like grumble. Like, we have got to do a better job of holding people accountable, especially our quote unquote leaders, because they not only is the bar low, but they're also not leading anything. They want to be a bunch of Instagram stars, and that's really all they really do.
No, I appreciate that. No, so I hear what I think part of what you're saying is like right now our expectations aren't high. I mean, they're really the bar is really low.
One of our listeners literally said, "I'm so used to expecting nothing." Like, that's what we are. We expect nothing. We don't expect anything from them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for that. Yeah, Paula?
I think our political leaders do an excellent job serving at least one function of a priest. They're still supervising a sacrificial system, but it's just not goats and sheep that they're sacrificing. It's human life.
Yeah.
I don't know what the solution is. It seems like this whole country has lost its ability to be compassionate. Second, before I forget about it, Polly Murray, that was mentioned a couple of times, there is an excellent documentary that came out this year on her life, on their life. I don't remember if it's Apple or Prime or what. I'm thinking it's on Prime, but it's worth watching. I think it's a two-parter.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I will look for that and see if we can put it in the chat. Or if someone else can find it, that would be great. I would love to have a link to that. Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that part of what I was leading into with what I was sharing is that I think, we really need a cultural shift in how we talk about this stuff. I mean, I feel like you were saying, Paula, that so much of our system depends on people suffering and being sacrificed. And to shift that narrative to say, no, we really expect our leaders to be shepherds, instead of saying, oh, well, we need them to be business people we need to run the country like a business, or we need to run our city like a business so that it's profitable. No, you're a shepherd. So the idea is you do need to be sustainable, but you need to run it with the idea that you're taking care of those on the bottom. Like how the metric for how well you are leading should be, how well are the poor doing under your watch? And like, just to make that the expectation for Christians. Go ahead.
Not just the poor.
Right.
One of our members has fought for years for her handicapped son to have rights, and we do a terrible job with that.
Yeah.
Especially in our school systems.
Mm-hmm. Right. So who are the most vulnerable, and how well are they doing? Yeah. Rob?
It's funny. I mean, we talk about needing to expect anything, and that seems kind of like the missing piece, right? Like we've had that expectation, the expectation that we should expect anything, stripped away, right? Because it's talking about running the country like a business. When you outsource pastoral care to religion, then you really have multiple flocks, and the country is now an agribusiness, and all you're concerned about is shipping product, right? And the product is our labor. So, but if you try to talk, you alluded to this, Dave, if you try to talk about what society should look like, what is a just society, right? Then, oh no, that's social engineering, that's socialism. So that's inadmissible, so it's funny because this whole narrative has succeeded in leaving the churches and the religious organizations and charitable organizations holding the bag with zero accountability on the part of the people who are actually responsible for things being as bad as they are. Yeah. So it's like, well, the implicit idea is, well, no, this is just the way things are, and this is perfectly fine. You can't change it. You shouldn't want to change it. And there are these wonderful organizations that have the job of putting a Band-Aid on it for you if you need one. A Band-Aid for an economic skinned knee that is actually a sucking chest wound, right?
Yeah.
And so, in my mind, like the way the Christian church has fallen down is in totally abdicating responsibility for that prophetic vocation, because the prophets are the ones who have over and over again worked to remind us where our expectations should be, and that we should have expectations, and that God cares about that expectation, that society should be just, right? And that looks a certain way, and it is not the way things are. But I mean, certainly in America, the church has largely just been complicit in this whole thing, and I mean, it's interesting to maybe ponder why.
I think so. I appreciate you. I appreciate you bringing that up, Rob, too, because I do think that the church, there's like some kind of bargain that was made, right? To say, okay, we'll do the charitable stuff, and we won't harass you. And what was the implicit or explicit? I don't know, maybe been explicit. What was the social bargain that we made when we traded our prophetic voice for coping skills? When we traded holding power accountable. Anyway, yeah, Miller.
Yeah, I think part of the issue here is that people who want power, who are in power, kind of use giving people what they want as like a way to stay in power. So rather than actually being sort of the maestro of like social good, you're using it like a civ game, like in Civ 6 in individual cities. You have to keep track of happiness, you have to keep track of how well fed people are, otherwise the city will rebel and go join somebody else. So if they're using it as sort of this way to keep power, and a convenient thing to do is to sort of convince people that they want things that are easy to give them, like hating marginalized groups and
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Picking a scapegoat. Absolutely. Paula?
I think a huge part of it has been the abdication of pastors
Mm-hmm.
from the prophetic role. I have known so many cases where a pastor, well, first of all, I was on a pulpit committee where one of the people said, I want to find a pastor that we're comfortable with. And I wanted to say, I want to find a pastor that makes us uncomfortable. And pastors want to keep their jobs, and it's so easy. I mean, statistics show that 1/3 of the pastors in the United States are fired every year because they made somebody uncomfortable. And so many just
You may need to move your cat a little. Paula.
You
You're
gotta
really
mute it, Paula.
You have a cat mute. You have an animal mute.
There's like
We told y'all life happens in church.
Well, I was just saying, so many pastors aren't willing to take the risk of speaking prophetically because 1/3 of the pastors in the United States are fired every year.
Yeah.
And they want to keep a job and they want to feed their family. So they just shut up and say comforting things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's coping. It's how to kind of like how to be comfortable in your awful situation rather than let's alleviate the awful situation. Yeah. Yeah, Tony?
I want to raise a couple of comments from Andy in our chat. He says that the most vulnerable are children in foster care. He believes, especially minority children and mentally ill people in the streets, and they are. And like the churches really do absolutely nothing to really do anything about it. I told y'all about my visits to the West Coast. Like I really had to like talk to my therapist a couple of times about walking over homeless people in San Francisco because like I don't know how people do that every day. Like I don't know how you live in a major city like that, and something does not like prick your spirit or your heart to say that we need to try to do something about this. Like literally, all they go is, "Well, this isn't our problem." You know, so like that is really really tough for a lot of people. But like the other thing is like when you're talking about earlier about the narrative of Jesus being king, like I'm pretty sure that there's some like ancient Aramaic word that we just can't translate properly for the type of king that they meant. Because like when you think about especially like modern day kings, like really they really don't have any power for real. And then even in the medieval times, they really just kind of snatched power to whoever was the strongest and had the largest army. So like we don't want Jesus to be a king like that.
Right.
The last thing Andy says, we're talking about Civ in church. I have really found my people.
Yeah.
Therese also has a great comment over here in the chat. Oh, sorry, if you were going to say something, go ahead. But
no, would you go ahead and read it?
Yeah. Okay. It would be weird to expect leadership and integrity out of elected officials. I remember growing up how Jimmy Carter was always held up as an example of how good men can't lead. I was very young, but I remember it bothering my 4-year-old self. I was not very savvy about politics, but I remember how Reagan scared me, and I liked Carter and how over my childhood this theme unfolded. I grew up being very aware that we culturally have an expectation for our leaders to deceive us or be corrupt, and for that to be part of the job description. We just want them to be corrupt in a way that benefits us. It's really deeply ingrained, and I've definitely heard the Bible, especially stories from the kings of Israel and Judah, used to justify the God needs bad people to do good work.
Yes. Thank you for lifting that up, Teresa. I think there is something about like, and we heard it a lot back in the election of 2016, people saying, I don't want my president to be a pastor. And I would always think of this verse from Ezekiel, right? Which was like, you lousy shepherds, right? Yeah, I mean, in some ways, policy is different than preaching. I acknowledge that. And people have sometimes told me, oh, you need to run for elected office. And I'm like, policy ain't preaching. I mean, policy, especially in our system, means you have to make compromises if you want to get something passed. And that's part of this whole, like, you got to disappoint people once you're elected. But I still think there's like a world of difference between sort of acknowledging, okay, there's real politics, there's stuff you got to do to lead, and like, what's your metric? Like, what's the metric we're using? How do we measure successful leadership? And consistently in the Hebrew Bible, it's how are the poor doing? If the poor aren't doing well, you suck as a leader. I mean, that should be the equation. Anyway, I'm sorry, that's my own. I'm preaching again. So go ahead, Tony.
I want to give the gavel to Rob, and then I'll come back to mine because he had a great comment in the chat. I want him to talk about.
Okay.
You can't talk on mute though, buddy.
Hand down, and I figured that would take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
About getting fired from their positions. I think it's really interesting to reflect on the religious landscape in America as a commercial construct, right?
Mm-hmm.
So many polities are totally congregational. Individual congregations hire and fire their own pastors, right? In a structure, a denominational structure like the United Methodist Church, in theory, there's, guaranteed appointment, at least for, some people, right? And so, hypothetically, that gives you some protection against completely losing your livelihood. But hearing it, I haven't confirmed this, but I thought I saw that like the Global Methodist Church, which is the, angry conservative, we're going to break away because you're not hateful enough organization, they want to do away with guaranteed appointment. So that's playing even more into the hands of the commercial aspect of it, which is that of course you should have to keep your job by pandering. Why wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know, that feels like it also then bears on this problem of like what I have this need to ask, like, what even is the Revolutionary Act right now?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like to imagine that we should even be worried about a just society beyond like a very specific injury oriented level, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here in Seattle, obviously we're very concerned about homelessness and unaffordable housing. And like, I mean, just in the time we've lived here, we've had multiple ballot things come up where we approve new taxes, new funding to try to address affordable housing and try to deal with this, which I'm glad. It's better than not doing anything, right? But just thinking about the specific problem doesn't really frame it as how is our society failing? How could our
Mm-hmm.
society be doing better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that just seems like so much. I don't know. It seems like the Revolutionary Act is actually something really small, and it's just for the church to insist on reminding us all that society is what we make it, and it could look different,
Mm-hmm.
and that maybe take 100 years to rehabilitate our sense that like, oh yeah, we are in control of that. It's not just a found thing.
Right.
I don't know.
No, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that we often miss is that we built the system we got.
Mm.
And so what that means is we have a choice. And it may not I may not have a huge amount of power to change it, but I've got some. And then how do I exercise that power to moving toward the change that I want to see? And there's something I want to roll back on something else you said, Rob. You talked about this, the job of the prophetic role that clergy play. That so often, if it's just a commercial thing, I have a friend on Twitter, David Dark, who says that pastors are only as honest as their wealthiest donor, and you've heard me say that before, right? So that's one of the challenges. I don't know how many mega church celebrity pastors in the last few years have fallen from their perch because of sexual abuse and harassment, and because of this. There seems to be something endemic to having that much power and that much celebrity that eventually, instead of saying we need to hold people accountable, we start saying we need to protect their brand, we need to protect their image, and there's all this cover up because our church is invested in this celebrity, right? And so that person can never actually be prophetic. In because anyway, it's just an interesting
Colonel
dynamic.
Sanders can't criticize the chicken.
Right, exactly. Anyway, yeah, Tony, you had your hand up.
Woo, I got a lot. So like, first I want to talk about what Ross coming about, what Seattle is doing to try to help with that homeless problem. And even with that, Seattle is looked at one of those weak democratically led cities, like literally the city that is trying to do something that Jesus told us to do, which was take care of the homeless. Somehow or another, these religious zealots think that, oh, well, they're just wrong and weak and democratic. The other thing I want to talk about is kind of like the separation of like church and state for a second. So like with the pastors that you're talking about were that they fire a third of them. Here's the thing. If pastors were really preaching the word of God and really making sure their flocks were taken care of, when those pastors left, guess who would also leave? The people that they were leading. So like, I think it's a cop out for people to say, well, if I do this, then I'm going to lose my job, because not that everybody needs to be a martyr, but like, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. It is not lost on me that a year ago, Tuesday, I lost my job for speaking up for people who are marginalized. I lost my job. I lost my livelihood. I lost my health insurance. I had a special needs kid in private school. I lost everything. But my life is so much better now because I also found what my purpose really is. Like, even without having an agency, I counsel people at my home on what to do with their queer kids, because that's what I'm supposed to do. So like, I think a lot of these pastors have gotten confused with the celebrity of what they're doing and not with the righteous word of what they were supposed to be doing. Because like, even with a lot of power, if you are really rooted in the word, I don't think just having power is going to corrupt you. I think having power without the knowledge and the compassion that God wants us to have is what corrupts. And the last thing is, even with the framers of our Constitution, this is the political aspect. One of y'all said something earlier that sometimes you have to disappoint the people that elect you. Like, that is literally what causes the spirit of compromise, which is why we have a bicameral legislature, which is why we have all these checks and balances. It's also why these checks and balances are no longer working. Because when you have gerrymandered the system to where before voters pick their politicians, when the politicians pick their voters, they know there ain't no way in hell they can disappoint these people, because you're definitely going to lose your job. But this is because we bastardized the system that was supposed to make it so that, okay, sometimes I'm going to have to disappoint the people that we elect. We know that. And literally it's on both sides. Like we have done this to ourselves. So maybe it will take another 100 years for us to figure out how to dig ourselves out of this grave that we are we have dug and now really kind of filling up, because this is what we've done. Like, we have literally made it impossible for a compromise, because the ultra right, if you're not saying that, the insurrection didn't happen and Donald Trump is king, you won't get elected. Right. On the ultra left, if you're not trying to do everything for free and check all the boxes, you're not going to get elected. Like, this is where we are. We have lost the spirit of compromise, and which is totally screwing up the way our government was supposed to work.
Yes.
So I appreciate that. I think you put your finger on something important. I want to observe that the way that we've conceived of decision making and leadership, even democratic, power sharing, really revolves around Robert's Rules of Order. And the whole idea is that's an adversarial system where one side stands up, and it's like old English rules of battle. Like, one side stands up and shoots, and the other side stands up and shoots, and whoever has more wins. Like, that's Robert's Rules of Order. And then you get all this, the technical, okay, well, was this the second motion to reverse the first motion? And are we calling the question? And you have all this stuff intended to formalize combat, which is an adversarial system. Whereas if we had something like, I don't know, ranked choice voting or something along those lines, or there are other models of decision making in the church. Unfortunately, the church adopted Robert's Rules of Order. That's why we have, in the Methodist Church, we have General Conference. which and the structure which is based on American democracy that really needs to be kicked to the curb, in my opinion.
Amen.
We have to have a way of listening to people and including voices at the table and discerning leadership, but it ain't Robert's Rules of freaking Order. It should be something that looks more God honoring than combat, in my opinion. There are ways, like I was part of an intentional community, or I wasn't part of it, but I visited an intentional community where they did 5-finger voting. So if 5 was I'm all in, 4 is I'm in, but I have some reservations. 3 was I could probably be convinced, but I'm not convinced yet. 2 is I'm not convinced. 1 was I'm against this, right? And so a motion would come up and you would see where people stood. And then if you didn't have 4s or 5s, if not everyone is a 4 or 5, you didn't do it, which is about community kind of working out its problems. Now, I don't know that would work for like a nation, but I'm saying like, if we just started from that basis and understanding the ways that we made decisions locally differently, maybe that would trickle up. Maybe that would change our expectations from our other leaders on what we want in terms of compromise. And anyway, that's my idealistic brain, how that works. But someone read Teresa's comment. Teresa's got a good comment.
Sure, I can get that. We need to acknowledge that the mega wealthy have different thoughts than we do, and expecting them to address our concerns is not going to happen. If you have zero worries about paying a power bill for the rest of your life, if you feel confident you have enough money to maintain your physical needs for the rest of your life, then how on earth can you understand what the everyday needs of people are who are living paycheck to paycheck are like, much less actual homelessness or poverty? Expecting the super wealthy and super powerful to be looking out for our best interests seems really upside down to me for this reason. We've got this idea that rich people are better than us. They're not. They are just more willing to do what it takes to get into power. They're more risk tolerant. But is it really risk tolerance if you aren't risking anything personally? But if we, the people who do have power, if we get together, insist on a different paradigm, we can actually elect and lift up leaders who get it.
That's a good word. Thank you, Teresa. Robert, I'm going to give you the last word before we move to.
You may not want it to be the last word. This is it's sort of idle speculation, that has come through my mind from time to time, and Teresa made me think of it again. I have wondered, what it would be like if serving in Congress was more like jury duty. Like Congress is being called for a month, and it's like you're in Congress. Like,
I was just thinking that. My thing is that people who say that that's crazy, they are the ones who are that tells you what they think of society.
Yeah.
That they are afraid that these people would screw them over,
Yeah.
That like random people going into office who aren't schooled enough to know what people need to live, would break the system, and it would break it for them.
Yeah. Totally. I know that's what I think. One of the reasons in the Bible they cast lots. That's biblical. Let's cast lots.
Hey, one more thing that about what Teresa
Short
said.
straw goes to Congress.
One thing about Teresa said, I wish when Miller was reading that comment, I was immediately taken back to, was it Wilbur Ross, who was Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary, when they shut down the government, was like, well, all you got to do is go down to your local branch and talk to the president, tell him you need a loan for a couple of weeks. Like, this ain't Mayberry, bro.
Yeah.
Like, this ain't Mayberry. That doesn't happen in the real world. I don't know who my bank president is. Like, what world are they living in?
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Different worlds.
And Andy also says that people want the instant gratification they got from the internet to be applied to politics, which is also a problem.
That's very true. That's very true. Well, thank you all for solving the world's problems with me today.
There you go.
Let's go back to prayer, because oh my God, that's the only thing that's gonna get us through this, right? Let me pull this up.
And a little action.
Can you see this? Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Put feet to your prayers, right?
All right. How great is your goodness, dear Lord? Blessed are you forever. May all created things praise you, O God, for loving us so much that we can truthfully speak of your fellowship with humankind, even in the earthly exile. And however virtuous we may be, our virtue always depends on your great warmth and generosity, dear Lord. Your bounty is infinite. How wonderful are your works. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
Thank you all for joining us for worship today. If you've been on Facebook or YouTube, again, please like or comment with where you're watching from, so we have a way of counting you. If you're on, we're going to stop the live stream here in just a minute. If you're on Zoom, stick around for just a minute more.